Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here, and for this episode, we are talking about Imprint Films again. Imprint Films, of course, from Australia. They are a division of Via Vision Entertainment, but as I've said on previous episodes, all their discs so far that I've come across are region-free, meaning you can play them anywhere in the world without any problem or a need for a multi-region player. And as I'm sure I've mentioned before on this show, I am pretty excited about what they've been doing. They have a tendency to do some Blu-ray debuts. I've talked about some Blu-ray debuts, and there's a bunch in here. I hope to be as exact as I can with which ones are Blu-ray debuts, but there are definitely a couple that I am very excited about. They have a decent deal with Paramount, and they do some MGM stuff. I think they've done some Universal stuff, but the big ones for me, I think, are mostly Paramount titles. Yes, I want to say almost all the big ones here are Paramount titles. But this is the October bundle that they put out. They do things in bundles, and they sell out, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But obviously these titles are available individually as well, and you can get them, if not from Imprint Films themselves, from places like Import CDs, Diabolic DVD. I'm trying to think. Amazon does get them, so that's an option as well. And I think even Orbit DVD gets some imprints. They're pretty big on imports over at orbitdvd.com. But anyway, let's get into this. I'll start with my favorite of the bunch right off the top. We have Save the Tiger from 1973. Now, this is a film from John G. Avildsen, and he would come to be known as the director of Rocky, the director of The Karate Kid. You know, he is this triumphant sports guy. But what's interesting is that a lot of people don't know or don't remember his earlier work, the work that got him the attention that then led to those films like Rocky and The Karate Kid. He did a bunch of films in the late 60s and early 70s, kind of countercultural, kind of, you know, on the pulse of what was happening, low budget films. And he would have his breakout in 1970 with the film Joe, all about a very bigoted blue-collar guy played by Peter Boyle, who gets into a situation where he meets an upper-class dude who's dealing with his hippie daughter, and they sort of hit it off, and it's a bizarre film. It's ostensibly kind of a comedy, but it's also very much a social commentary, which is definitely something Avildsen was avid about in his early career. But Joe was a big hit, and that came out in 1970. Save the Tiger, I think, is his next film after that. I might have to double check that, but regardless, it's one that comes really soon after. No, he did a few films after Joe. He did Cry Uncle, OK Bill, and then this. But this is what ended up being a big studio movie from Paramount, a low-budget movie, but one that is really memorable for the Jack Lemmon performance. And that performance is something he had to be really talked into. And I'm so glad he was, because it is a character that is really not like too many Jack Lemmon characters. I mean, he played a lot of everyman characters. He played a lot of affable, likable guy kind of characters. His character of Harry Stoner in this film is a really complicated guy. It's, you know, one of the more complicated roles he ever did in movies. And he did definitely do those, you know, Days of Wine and Roses, Glengarry Glen Ross. I mean, these are complicated guys, you know. But Harry Stoner is a really interesting one. He is a guy who runs sort of an apparel company. You know, they have they make clothing, and they're struggling. And he and his partner, played by Jack Gilford, have kept the company afloat by sort of juggling the books, little creative accounting. But when we find Harry at the beginning of this movie, he is in a position where that isn't going to work anymore, and they have to do something else. And so he's having a sort of moral crisis and a midlife crisis. He's a married guy, lives in Beverly Hills in a nice house. On his way into the sort of the warehouse where they work, he picks up this hippie girl on, I don't know if it's Sunset Boulevard or wherever. This is an LA movie. And they have sort of a weird connection, and then he sort of lets her go on her way, and that comes back in the film later. But so Harry is really juggling to try and keep things afloat, whether it be getting some call girls for one of their prominent investors, I think, dealing with a potential idea of insurance fraud, some things he's really in a difficult position about. And he's also really haunted by his experiences in the war, and that comes into play. I won't go too far into detail on that, but that really comes into the movie a lot in the midst of this crisis he's having. And again, just a really, really powerful performance by Lemmon, both wistful and just incredibly thoughtful in terms of how he approaches the character. And again, a character that he didn't think he could do and had to be talked into. And I'm so glad that happened, because again, I think it's one of his best films. And yeah, just one of those movies you watch and it just has a lot of poetry in the writing and the performance from Lemmon. And Guilford's very great. And yeah, it's really good stuff. So anyway, I think the budget on Joe was like $250,000, and this one, I think Lemmon was the writer and producer, Steve Shagan, who's on the commentary track with John G. Avildsen, which is ported from the old DVD, which is a really, really great track. I think he and Lemmon saw Joe and wanted to get Avildsen as the director, and they were able to get $1 million for this movie, which wasn't a lot at the time to make this film on the scale they wanted to make it, but it really came together. So anyway, just a great movie. This is a Blu-ray debut, and it is all region and has some nice features. I think my favorite by far is that commentary from Avildsen and producer Steve Shagan. They have a lot of great stories about Jack Lemmon, about getting the film made, about the industry at the time. Really good stuff. There's also a commentary by film historian, filmmaker Daniel Kramer. There's something called Ammo for Shooting Clouds, John G. Avildsen Before Rocky, a video essay by Daniel Kramer. That's pretty good. I want to say that's about 25 minutes, something like that, 17. Just going through his career again, talking about the early films, talking about the stuff he did before Rocky, and I think that is worthwhile for sure. There's also an interview with Lloyd Kaufman, who was a surprise. He apparently met John G. Avildsen in 1969 and ended up as a production assistant on Joe, assistant director on Cry Uncle. Talks about all his memories of those films and Avildsen himself. Talks a bit about auteur theory. It's just some really fun stuff from Lloyd Kaufman, Mr. Troma, you wouldn't expect. And then we have an interview with the actress that plays the hippie girl, that is Laurie Heineman. And she goes into detail about getting the part, how she was like Scott Glenn's babysitter or something, actor Scott Glenn. And oh no, sorry. She was. Well, she was hanging out with Scott Glenn's babysitter to get a vibe for the character that she then played in this movie. But really interesting interview process and memories of Jack Lemmon. And I just love stories about Jack Lemmon. He's one of my favorite actors. So anytime I can hear people talking about him, and most stuff I've heard, he's always been incredibly gracious, incredibly professional, and just a delightful guy. So anyway, that's about 23 minutes, and then trying to think what else we have on this disc. I think that's it. There's a Jack Lemmon vintage interview from 1973, about 7 minutes or so. Just him talking about the state of movies a little bit, and then a little bit about this part and specific scenes and how he didn't rehearse certain things. And I love Jack Lemmon, so an interview with him is obviously quite welcome. I'd put this for me among my favorite discs of the year, and I would put that mostly on the commentary and the movie. I really, really love this movie, and I was really excited to see it get a Blu-ray from Imprint. It may or may not get a stateside Blu-ray, but if you're a fan of great Jack Lemmon performances, Save the Tiger is an absolute must. So that's our first movie. Next up, we have another favorite of mine. These two back-to-back are just the gems from this round. Actually, the next one's pretty great too. But North Dallas 40 from 1979. This is directed by Ted Kotcheff, who would go on to do First Blood, among other things. And it is a story about a professional football player, an aging ball player, played by Nick Nolte. And it is based on a book, the novel by Peter Gent, screenplay by Frank Yablans and Ted Kotcheff and Peter Gent, produced by Yablans. And it's one of these movies that is, it says an aging ball player who, through a woman he meets, is drawn away from the masculine, violent world in which he has lived so long, and in doing so finds himself at odds with the team's management. That's a very succinct summation of this film. It's one of the best movies about football ever, and it's such a critical look at the behind the scenes of the football world, professional football world. I mean, this is a movie that opens, I believe, with a party at the Playboy Mansion, or I think it's the Playboy Mansion. I can't remember if it's denoted in the film or if that's something I just heard in the commentary. But it's a wild party, and it's a party where you're watching the players interact with women, and at a party like this, in a lot of movies, the women seem to be having a good time, but in this case, the women are genuinely kind of afraid, and rightfully so, because there's some crazy football players, and the most monstrous of them played by Bo Svensson, who's just an unleashed crazy man who just, we see him pick up a television and throw it into a swimming pool. He's grabbing women. He's sort of assaulting them. Not sort of. And it's scary. It's a scary scene. And even Nick Nolte himself, which the movie opens with an incredible sequence of him just getting up in the morning. And we see him flashing back to the game the night before and how much of a beating he took during that game. And you can feel every movement of every time he moves and gets up and shifts his body. You can feel the pain that he's in, especially this late in his career. It's just a guy who's barely getting by, gets right into the tub to try and alleviate some of that pain before a bunch of his football buddies show up and knock down the front door and drag him off on a hunting trip, which is a bizarre opening. But yeah, then you have this party, and it's Nick Nolte is rightfully disenchanted with the way that his co-teammates are behaving, and it goes from there. It talks about, the management player conflict. You have the great G.D. Spradlin playing the coach of this football team. Now, they're called I forget what the team is called, but it's sort of a generic. Basically, the NFL didn't want this movie to be made, so there's no NFL anything to do with this game, as much as it's clear that it's about the NFL. All the teams are sort of made up teams. But G.D. Spradlin plays a coach, as he often did. He did in One-on-One with Robbie Benson and a few other films, and he's just a real jerk. He's a real self-righteous, browbeating, unpleasant guy. I'm obviously a good coach in that he knows what he wants, but is not particularly kind to the players, not particularly fair to the players. Charles Durning plays one of the sort of coach's assistants. As I mentioned, there's also Steve Forrest, I want to say, plays one of the upper management or something, and he's a very good sleazy type for this. But yeah, a lot of the conflict is Spradlin and Nolte, who is, like I said, a seasoned veteran, and now he's dealing with a quarterback played by Mac Davis. You don't get hooked on me, Mac Davis, who is really good in this movie, and just the kind of performance you almost don't fully absorb the first time you watch it. The second time, you're kind of like, wow, he's doing some really interesting things with this guy, It's not just a bravado character archetype. It's something else. But yeah, so Nolte's dealing with his tensions with some new players coming on the team and just all kinds of great behind-the-scenes football stuff. It's really a remarkable film and a great drama with some dark comedy and some other things in it. But one of Nolte's best performances. As with Save the Tiger, which is one of Lemon's best, I think this is one of Nolte's best, and just a great movie making its debut on Blu-ray. So we have a new 4K scan presentation of the film from Paramount Pictures, and so that, and it looks good. An audio commentary with Daniel Creamer and screenwriter Daniel Waters, which is really great. And there's some clips of Ted Kotcheff mixed in here as well. But Dan Waters is one of my favorite people to hear talk about really anything, but definitely movies. And it's funny how he goes into, I guess he's a football guy. I didn't realize this, but he's like talking about how much you can get away with in terms of weirdness if you let people know you like football. They'll give you a lot of leeway. And I think that's a great philosophy that Dan has figured out. But anyway, I love hearing Dan talk movies, so that was really cool to have him on that track. There's an introduction by Ted Kotcheff, about 1 minute and 20 seconds, just a little, setting things up. And then Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Ted Kotcheff remembers North Dallas 40. That is about five and a half minutes of him. Basically, it's like a Zoom call. He's reading an essay sort of thing that he's prepared, and it's neat. It's definitely well thought out, but that's all it is. It's just about 5 minutes of him going through that, talking about specific people on the production that he appreciated and the production itself, and it's solid. And then there is looking to get out a comparative analysis of the Ted Kotcheff Vision video essay as well. But a nice Blu-ray debut for North Dallas 40. Next up, the other of the big ones here is Pretty Baby. This is Louis Malle's film from 1978. And this is a cult item, a movie that I discovered through cult sections of video stores way back in the day, starring a very young Brooke Shields. I want to say she was 11 or 12 when she made this movie. And it is about 1917, the red light district of New Orleans, the story of the women, the photographer, and the prostitute's daughter. E.J. Belloc is photographer obsessed with the prostitutes in a New Orleans red light district. Violet, a young girl, bewitches Belloc with her curiosity and naive coquettishness. So this film is very controversial because of the underage Brooke Shields, who's very good in the film. One of her earliest performances, not quite her first. And she plays the daughter of Susan Sarandon, who is a prostitute in this whorehouse brothel in New Orleans in 1917. And Keith Carradine plays a photographer who comes in and starts photographing the women there and starts to sort of fall for this young girl. And they have sort of a relationship, and that, I think, is really the center of the controversy of the film. It's definitely a film that will make people uncomfortable, understandably, but it is a really great performance from Brooke Shields, very naturalistic, and Louis Malle, I think, did his best to sort of get out of her way and let her be in this movie. And Keith Carradine's great, Susan Sarandon great. It's photographed by Sven Nykvist, of course, worked with Bergman, and looks very good, impeccably lit in many ways. But this is a film that saw a lot of controversy. I think it won Cannes that year and then came back to the States and was just annihilated by critics and people who were not into the idea of the film, which I understand. But I think it's come to have something of a reevaluation over the years. It's a cult item. It is uncomfortable, certainly, but definitely one of Malle's better films. And this is a new 4K scan from Paramount, and it looks very nice, I gotta say. So this one has an audio commentary by Kat Ellinger. It also has The Experience of Innocence, Brooke Shields on Pretty Baby, which is cool. It's a 2022 interview with Brooke Shields, and she's about 57 now, I think. And 23 minutes long. Just really neat to hear her memories of the production, how sweet Keith Carradine was, how little Louis Malle directed her. She would go on to talk about going to Princeton and writing papers, and including one on Pretty Baby, and getting an interview with him. And it's really fascinating. But her idea at the time was this is going to be my Paper Moon. This is going to be the movie that I come back to the States, and it gets me some attention. And that didn't happen. This movie was crucified. And so I think it was for a long time a sort of not a sore subject, but something that she just sort of let go away. And she seems to have come around to it. And again, it's a really neat and intimate interview with her talking about her memories of the film and the production. I really enjoyed it. There's a video essay by Daniel Creamer on this one, 25 minutes. Didn't really dig that, I'll be honest. A little pretentious, not too much my bag, but ultimately still a good release. And the Kat Ellinger commentary and the Brooke Shields interview are worth your time. And it's nice to see this cult item from Pretty Baby, from Louis Malle, get a nice release. Again, all region from Imprint. Okay, I'll go through the rest of these a little quicker. Next, we have Testament. This is from 1983. And this film is one of a few big sort of post-nuclear attack movies that were happening around this time. The TV movie The Day After premiered on television, I want to say a couple weeks after Testament hit theaters. This particular story is about a family dealing with the attack and the aftermath of the attack and the potential loss of their father in the attack and maybe some other losses. It has a really nice cast, including a very young Lucas Haas. It has William Devane. It has, I guess he's introducing in this, so he may be one of his first. But Jane Alexander plays the mother. She's really good in this movie. Ross Harris, and I want to say there's some other actors I reckon. Brad Harris. Yeah. Anyway, but it is, if I'm honest, a pretty depressing movie. Pretty tough watch and really haunting in that way. I mean, it's not quite Threads level, but it's in the conversation with a movie like Threads and The Day After, and it is memorable in that sense. Yeah, it's tough, but I do think it stands out as a movie that people won't soon forget. This has multiple commentaries. It has a commentary by television movie expert Amanda Reyes, who, of course, wrote the book on TV movies with her book, Are You in the House Alone? A TV movie compendium, 1964-1969. I always love Amanda's commentary. She does a delightful job here, and she's very excited to be part of this release. She's a fan of this movie. Another commentary by David J. Moore, who wrote the book World Gone Wild, A Survivor's Guide to Post-Apocalyptic Movies. A great book, by the way. I highly recommend, and he has his own take on that. I would say Amanda's doing more with contextualizing the film and the period in which it came out, life during the Cold War in this era, and how this formed popular culture and commentary on our collective fears and tensions. And Moore is doing some of that too, but he's also talking about other movies. He's talking about Threads. He's talking about Where the Wind Blows and things like that. So there's a lot of other things brought into that track. Then we have Testament at 20 featurette. I think these are brought over from a DVD because I want to say, the movie would have been 20 years old in 2003. And then Nuclear Thoughts featurette, as well as Timeline of the Nuclear Age. So a lot of nuclear stuff happening here. Now, the Testament at 20 featurette, that's about 26 minutes. It's kind of a making of, and features Lucas Haas, Brad Harris, Jane Alexander sort of meeting, seeing each other for the first time after 20 years, and that's kind of a neat part of it. But then it's also interviews with director-producer Lynn Littman, producer Jonathan Bernstein, exec producer Lindsay Law, John Sacred Young, the writer, and Stephen Poster, the DP, talking about various aspects of the writing it, getting the rights to the story, lighting things, even creating the nuclear blast in the movie, all kinds of interesting stuff. So that's a cool featurette. Nuclear Thoughts is about 12 and a half minutes, and it's has some messages from the government that open it, one from 2004, and then Duck and Cover from 1951. And then we get to see a group of students from the Renaissance Arts Academy in Los Angeles. They watch Testament and then sort of are interviewed afterwards. But then we also get interviews with Hiroshima survivor. We get an interview with Jane Alexander again. She's part of the previous making of. And then Kevin Costner, and he and Rebecca De Mornay have a small part in the film at one point, and that's neat. But Costner shows up in an interview in this, so that's kind of cool too. Yeah, so that is it for Testament. Very nice. I think also Blu-ray debut for this film. Then we have Warning Shot, and this one is from 1967. It stars David Janssen, who was at the height of his, near the height of his fame, in that he was making The Fugitive television show, and this film was shot between seasons, I believe. But the idea, as you see here, a routine nighttime stakeout, a shadowy figure, a foot chase with shots fired, and then every police officer's nightmare. Sergeant Tom Valance has fatally shot what he perceived to be an armed suspect, but the man's purported weapon is nowhere to be found. Ignoring public outcry, Valance sets out to gather the puzzle pieces, produce the missing gun, and clear his name. So part of this is a courtroom drama, part of it is a procedural, but it's an interesting, really lesser talked about David Janssen movie from this period. Almost was a TV movie, but I think got a theatrical release, and I dig it. Has an audio commentary from film historians Howard S. Berger and Steve Mitchell, giving context to both the Janssen as an actor and the film itself. But definitely worth a look. I enjoyed this film. I do recommend it. Next up, we have The Molly Maguires from 1970. This is directed by Martin Ritt. Stars, as you can see, Richard Harris, Sean Connery, Samantha Eggar, and it is Ritt who would do a lot of socially conscious films in his career. He did a lot of great movies. HUD with Paul Newman, Ombre with Paul Newman. I'm a big fan of both of those. But he would do things like, this particular film is about some Irish immigrant coal miners in 1876 retaliating against sort of their cruel work environment. And he would do something similar to this a few years later with Norma Ray. But he also did a lot of, society, sort of issue-conscious films like The Front, all about the blacklist, Conrack, The Great White Hope. No Down Payment is sort of an indictment of early suburban life. That's a really interesting movie. Twilight Time put that out on Blu-ray years ago. Anyway, he's a fascinating director and very sharp. And this movie opens with a wonderful 14-minute dialogue-less sequence of the mining setup. Anthony Zerbe also plays a part in this, and they get a little interview with him for this. The commentary track features... there's two. There's an Howard S. Berger track, and there's also an author-producer Daniel Creamer track, but also he talks to Nat... I didn't write down Nat's last name. This guy who was a publicist and film critic who knew Martin Ritt and the writer at the time, so he has some interesting insights from his personal connection to both. So two commentaries, and then we get a 17-minute interview with Anthony Zerbe, the actor, who I didn't even realize was still alive, which is great. But it's an audio interview with clips and photos. Nice to hear his recollections of actually working on the film and working with the other actors, etc. But, a heavy-duty, issue movie, a movie about fighting back against injustice, and Connery's very good in it, as is Richard Harris. It's a memorable one, and another one I don't think has had a Blu-ray. Same with Warning Shot, although that might have a Kino coming, or maybe it already had one, I can't remember. But I don't think this has had a Blu-ray yet. And so that's worthwhile. And then we got just a couple more here. We have a couple Burt Lancaster films. We have both Hal Wallace produced. Comeback Little Sheba. And this one is about 2 decades after their hasty wedding, Doc and Lola are stuck in a deadening and loveless marriage when a beautiful young lodger enters their home. Long repressed emotions explode. So it's Lancaster and Terry Moore, who is a great cult actor who was in a lot of movies, and I'm a big fan of her. This is a new 4K scan from Paramount. Audio commentary by film historian Scott Harrison, and a Burt Lancaster Daring to Reach vintage documentary is included on this disc. So it's a really nice movie. This is one that I have not seen, but I'm a big Lancaster fan of this period and a big Terry Moore fan. So I'm very curious to see how this one goes down. It sounds pretty tense to me, but I'm definitely into Come Back Little Sheba. And I don't know if this is a debut or not. I think it is. I think it is with this new 4K scan. And then lastly, we have one more. I think also a debut, but don't quote me. Lancaster movie I've heard great things about. And that is The Rose Tattoo from 1955. This one is from 1952, if I didn't say. And The Rose Tattoo is a Serafina Del Rose who has retreated from the world following the death of her beloved husband, reawakens to life's joys when she meets Alvaro, a happy-go-lucky truck driver who has the same sunny openness her husband had, even the same occupations, and on his chest is the same symbol of love, the rose tattoo. I remember hearing really great things about this from a friend of mine at the video store back in the early 2000s, and it was one that I had meant to see for years. Again, I don't think this is a new 4K scan. I don't think this has been on Blu-ray before. Has an commentary by Alan K. Rhodey, who is always aces, and To Prepare for Discovery, and Anna Magnani Rhapsody with filmmaker Rob Nilsson, all about that actor as well. So that is it for the imprints. I should show you all the covers here. This is the inside cover of Rose Tattoo, the inside cover of Come Back Little Sheba, Molly Maguires, Warning Shot, Testament, Pretty Baby, North Dallas 40, and my favorite, Save the Tiger. So that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Check out Imprint Films via, just search Imprint Films, and you'll go to the Via Vision website. You can see what they have brewing. Lots of great stuff always coming from them, and always region free. Thank you so much for your time. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.